And welcome back. Sandy certainly took our region by surprise. It was the largest Atlantic system on record, and it set numerous historical maximum recorded water levels at a bunch of different locations throughout the tri-state area. Now, the strength of the storm and the extent of the damage that it left behind indicate how truly unprepared we were for such a weather event. So, as we look towards the future, one has to ask if we're going to be better prepared the next time, and there will be a next time. For more now on that, we're pleased to be joined by Bill Ulfelder. He is the New York Executive Director of the Nature Conservancy. Bill, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, while people's attention is focused on this anniversary, let's just talk about the new normal. And while people said, hey, this was once in a generation or once in a century type storm, that's right. But to suggest that the chances of seeing it again in someone's lifetime is next to nil would be delusional, wouldn't it?
I think that's a very important point. And if folks recall a year ago or just under a year ago after Hurricane Sandy hit, remember Governor Cuomo and his words, hey, we just suffered through Hurricane Sandy. And just before Sandy, it was Irene, and before Irene, it was Lee. And I think in a climate changing world, we're going to see more and more intense storms, and with the sea level rise predictions, that's going to sort of exacerbate the impacts of these things. So I think that's the right term. It's a new normal that we in New York have to face.
But with that, and I think it's at least good, Bill, that you talk to people and the idea of climate change and global warming, with the exception maybe of a few conspiratorial few, most people accept it as just part of fact now, not debate. That said, though, what to do about it's the tricky part, and a lot of the solutions are expensive ones as belts are getting tightened, whether it be at state capitals or in Washington. So before people throw their hands up in the air, there are some things we can do about it, and it's a combination of what can be built and also a little bit about what you folks focus on, which is nature itself, right?
That's right. I think you've made a very important point, which is, the more we invest in hazard risk reduction, the better off we'll be. And studies have shown that every dollar invested will save about $4 in disaster mitigation. So investment is smart. And we at the Nature Conservancy, what we're saying, and what we served on the governor's 2100 commission about how to make New York more resilient in the wake of Sandy. We submitted a study for New York City for the mayor's report. And what we're saying is that natural defenses, so things like dunes, wetlands, oyster and mussel beds, parks, healthy beaches, barrier islands, these are all things that help protect us. And they're smart investments because when the gray infrastructure often costs hundreds of millions of dollars, these natural solutions might just be tens of millions of dollars, or when the gray is billions, this may be hundreds of millions. So these are things that can help protect us, and then they bring a lot of other benefits like clean water, clean air, and they tend to be cheaper than the gray solutions.
I'm sure you saw the Times in the science section, they did a piece on this where they talked about the import of this, and there seems to be an open debate as to how effective the dunes or the wetlands would be here for as serving as a barrier here for the next storm. Where is that debate really focused on right now?
Well, it's a great point, and what I'm so encouraged by is that we're having this debate and this conversation because, again, thinking back a year ago, just after Sandy hit, everybody wanted sort of simple or what they thought might be easy solutions. Like, again, the governor, right after the hurricane, was talking about let's build a giant sea gate at the Narrows, and that will protect New York City from storm surge. And what happened was, through the work of the commission, and I think there's been a very healthy debate and discussion this past year, folks are realizing that, there aren't simple solutions. We need to take a flexible approach, a mixed approach, and there are some places where there will be engineered solutions. The southern tip of Manhattan is probably a place where no amount of dunes or wetlands or oyster reefs are really going to make a big difference. But we have to remember that New York City has 520 miles of coastline, and New York State has over 1,500 miles. So you can't build your way because it's too expensive. And so there's going to be this mixed, thoughtful approach, I think, that's going to emerge over the coming years and even decades as we better understand climate change and the ways to reduce that risk. So I'm encouraged by the conversation that's going on today as compared to what was being discussed a year ago.
Do you think that the attention of those decision makers is as acute as it needs to be? Because you look around, and while some improvements have been made, in so many places we're just as vulnerable. And to your point, when there is beach erosion, when you see, I mean, even I went down to New Orleans to cover on various anniversaries of Katrina. When you wash away those barriers, natural barriers that are there, the next storm's even worse. Do you think that everybody gets just how time is not on our next side on this inevitability of another storm?
Well, I think Sandy was a real wake-up call, and we're human, and sometimes it takes being knocked down more than once. But what I love about New Yorkers is they get back up and, they sort of brush themselves off and say, okay, how do I handle this? And I think, back to your previous point, I think there's a very healthy conversation taking place today that's this mixed approach. So you're seeing things like what's happening out on Staten Island with the buyout program and people actually getting out of harm's way. There'll be other places where there's some real built solutions. But you're right. I mean, this century, sea level is expected to rise another 2/3 of a meter in New York City. We're seeing more and more of these, we'll call them billion-dollar climate-related catastrophes, and the price tag just keeps going up. So I think it goes back to your first point, which is the more we can invest in disaster risk reduction and resiliency today, the better off we'll be long-term. And what we need to do is find the ways to use the right resources in smart ways to reduce that risk. And nature can be a big part of that.
As we said off the top, it is the new normal. Bill, I appreciate it for you. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, everybody. RFL will be right back after this quick commercial break. Please stay with us.